Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Mexican Americans were encountering similar hardships that blacks had faced. Now, zoot suits were a popular attire worn by young Mexican Americans at this time, and in white communities around Southern California, they were seen almost as a kind of gang uniform, as they felt threatened by this rebellious form of fashion, as well as the ethnic pride it expressed. During the same summer of 1943 that riots had broken out between blacks and whites in Detroit, violence broke out when 11 servicemen reported that they had allegedly been attacked by zoot suiters. This rumor immediately sparked a flood of violence as mobs of civilians and off-duty servicemen poured into Mexican-American neighborhoods throughout Los Angeles and attacked any zoot suiters they could find. Hundreds of victims' clothes was torn from their body, and they were subsequently beaten senseless. While Japanese Americans were imprisoned in a country in which many had lived for generations, for the crime of simply being of Japanese descent, many young Japanese men joined the fight, but were only allowed to fight in Europe. Native Americans saw federal government investment in their reservations dramatically decrease during the war, and poverty became more widespread, while prejudice against the U.S.'s original inhabitants remained rampant. For example, Ira Hayes, who was one of the 6 men who hoisted the famous flag on Mount Suribachi above Iwo Jima, couldn't get a drink in any New York City bars while he was on a fundraising tour with 2 other Iwo Jima vets, showing once again that while all Americans were expected to sacrifice and fight, they would not necessarily earn equal treatment at home. Now, despite all of this, however, many people of color and women believed that their efforts in World War II would change America and white Americans' perspective on minorities. They believed their sacrifices would lead to greater respect and recognition, as well as greater equality in rights and pay. They were correct, but these gains would not directly precede World War II as most had hoped. It would take another generation of fighters, people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, Cesar Chavez, Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, who would help to deliver on this promise of equality. American music marches on. Jazz music, which had flourished after World War I as a result of the First Great Migration and then its popularity on radio, found new purpose in the Second World War. With 16 million men drafted into the armed forces, that meant many jazz musicians were also pulled into the fight. Some were asked to serve specifically to entertain the troops, to bring them a little reminder of the best of what America had to offer in order to keep their minds focused on why they fought. Glenn Miller, who was one of the most popular jazz conductors at the time, assembled a big band of jazz musicians that traveled around Europe to play to numerous audiences of GIs, not only bringing America back to American servicemen, but exposing many European soldiers to American jazz in person for the very first time. With hits like In the Mood, Pennsylvania 6-5000, and Chattanooga Choo Choo, the Glenn Miller Orchestra helped keep morale up and the GIs swinging. Tragically, however, Miller disappeared during December of 1944. Allegedly, his plane had gotten shot down over the English Channel as he was flying to play a concert for parts of recently liberated France. His plane and his body, however, were never found, leading to a number of possible alternative causes for his death. One of the most plausible comes from one of General Eisenhower's own staff, Lieutenant Colonel Hunton Downs, who contended that Miller, who spoke German, was asked to infiltrate Germany with other American spies to secretly try to convince high-ranking German officers to turn against Hitler and surrender. According to Downs, Miller was captured, however, and interrogated in a brothel where he was tortured and killed. The plane crash story was used as a cover-up to save his family the embarrassment that might be caused by finding his body in a place like a brothel. Regardless of his cause of death, Miller illustrated a kind of sacrifice we are completely unfamiliar with in this day and age from our celebrities. Stars like Clark Gable and Jimmy Stewart, 2 of Hollywood's biggest actors, and Ted Williams of the Boston Red Sox, one of the greatest baseball players of all time, in fact the only baseball player in history to have a batting average above 400 for an entire season. Miller put a highly lucrative career on hold in order to serve his country as best he could. Now, stars like Miller, Williams, Gable, and Stewart could have easily requested and had comfy desk positions far away from all the fighting in World War II, but these guys wanted to be right up at the front. They wanted to serve side by side with their fellow countrymen. Stewart, in fact, flew bombing missions over Europe, while Ted Williams learned how to fly fighter planes and escorted bombers over missions in Europe. These guys chose to fight because they were involved in a cause they believed in. With many of jazz's finest musicians either fighting or playing music for the troops abroad, the nature of the music changed dramatically. Most musicians couldn't find large bands to play with anymore. They were separated from one another. Instead, handfuls of musicians who happened to serve in the same unit or on board the same ship would try to get together during whatever spare time they could coordinate to play. These rehearsal sessions were rushed, time was limited, and as such they became known as jam sessions. Since practice time was greatly limited, musicians had to cram or jam in their best work in a very short period of time. And as a result, this created a new kind of jazz that was smaller in sound and more expressive than big band music. Improvisation, often by all members of the band at once, was heavily utilized since there wasn't much time to write or practice any complex group arrangements. Musicians would play together in agreed upon keys, rhythms, and meters, but would often be doing their very own thing within that framework. This creative twist on jazz would eventually get a name in the early 50s, become bebop, which is a derivation of the Spanish word arriba, since there were many great Cuban and Spanish jazz conductors. Now, arriba means take it higher, or play it faster, play it more passionately. It was an encouragement to play one's instrument with even more fire. Trumpeter Miles Davis would be the first and the best musician to create and produce jazz music around this format in the early 1950s and throughout his career until his death in 1991. By the 1940s, jazz music was the official American soundtrack. Dozens of songs relating to, if not directly promoting our fight in World War II, were released during the early 1940s, almost all of which were played in the style of big band jazz. One of the most popular groups at this time was the Andrews Sisters. Laverne, Maxine, and Patty Andrews to date have sold over 75 million records, appeared in 17 motion pictures, and had 113 hit songs, 46 of which reached Billboard magazine's top 10 list and had countless appearances on radio and later television. Backed by a big band jazz orchestra, these all-American girls scored big hits during World War II. They reminded their supposed boyfriends going over the seas to fight to "Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me." They sang about the glorious revelry that woke up servicemen every morning from the horn of the boogie-woogie bugle boy from Company B, and pled with the god of dreams to send them sweet visions of their lover overseas in Mr. Sandman, Bring Me a Dream. And they even joined up with America's most popular singer, Bing Crosby, to sing of the Victory Polka. The Andrews Sisters' harmonies and image were so popular and influential that even Christina Aguilera recently resurrected their image for one of her more recent albums. Meanwhile, a blind musician named Ray Charles was dramatically shaking up the musical establishment of the day as he combined the rhythms of jazz, the arrangements and vocal stylings of gospel music with the rootsier, earthier, perhaps even the dirty lyrical ideas found in blues music. Touring throughout the South during World War II and then relocating to Seattle, Washington in 1947, Ray Charles almost single-handedly created the genre known as rhythm and blues, and this would explode into the popular culture immediately after World War II, as musicians such as Ruth Brown and Big Joe Turner would even further popularize this new, very rebellious, very adult form of music. Rhythm and blues would combine with country influences during the early 1950s and create the music America is now most commonly associated with, rock and roll. Conclusion. As World War II would have dramatic repercussions around the world, its effects at home in the U.S. would be equally profound. World War II would lead to dramatic forms of rebellion in the years that followed. People of color would strike out en masse for equality they had long been denied, yet fought so frequently for. Women would quickly tire of their second-class citizenship status, and during the 1950s through the 1970s would lead a dramatic strike for equality. Popular music would change and evolve in response to the strains the war placed on musicians' shoulders. While it may be interesting to argue what could have been done to prevent the tremendous bloodshed and loss of life caused by World War II, it would be impossible to imagine an America without the rights, freedoms, and cultural changes it would instigate.